The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Alright, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over the Pentair family of variable speed pumps. There's currently 17 different configurations or variable speed pumps available from Pentair. So I'll go over which model you probably should choose for your pool, and I'll focus on some of the models that are the most popular on the market today. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. Let me start by just going over a few terms for you so you can track here in this podcast what I'm talking about. The first term is VST. You're going to see this on a lot of the new pumps. This just means variable speed technology. You may see pumps still labeled VS, variable speed. I think it's just a branding thing that they're doing. Some outlets have the Pentair WhisperFlo VS, for example, and then some have the Pentair WhisperFlo VST. It's essentially the same pump, but labeled differently. Now, the only one that you want to be concerned about if it's labeled VS is the older SuperFlo VS. I believe those have been discontinued. There may be a few outlets that still are selling them, but the SuperFlo should be the VST, and that's the newest version of it. And there's a distinction between the SuperFlo VS and the SuperFlo VST, and that is the older SuperFlo VS, you could not connect it to an automated panel. The newer SuperFlo VST, you can connect and it'll communicate with your automated system. And then you have the other moniker that they use, which is VSF, and this is on their higher end models like the IntelliFlo 3. And so the VSF stands for variable speed and flow. So this kind of has a built-in flow sensor, and I think that's the distinction of why they call it the VSF. Any Pentair VS pump made after November 2020 should be capable of communicating with an automated system. So keep that in mind. If you're buying a pump from an outlet and as you look at the box and you can see the manufacture date, if it's before November 2020, it's probably an older version, maybe a SuperFlo VS that can't communicate with an automated system. If you're talking price point, the Pentair SuperFlo VST will be the most affordable variable speed pump in their lineup. And then you have the Pentair WhisperFlo VS or VST. And then you have the IntelliFlo 3 VSF, which is their more expensive model. And of course, each one has slightly different features. I guess it would be like going to a Honda dealer. I guess there's nothing below the Civic. There may be something, but you have the Civic, you have the Honda Accord, and then you have Acura, which is like their luxury brand. And I would say it's similar to that. You have like the SuperFlo VST is the Civic. Then you have the Honda Accord, which would be the WhisperFlo VST. And then you have the Acuras, which would be the IntelliFlo 3 or any of the IntelliFlo 1 and 2 pumps. What makes it a little bit more confusing is that I think back in the 90s, I can't remember exactly when they acquired Stay Right, but Pentair acquired Stay Right Pool Products. The Stay Right is the black colored pumps out there, and you may have an old Duraglass on your route and you probably hate it, but Stay Right is actually owned by Pentair now, and basically, they have the same models across the Stay Right brand. They're black. They have slightly different names. For instance, they have the Supermax VS, which would be comparable to the SuperFlo VST. And then they have the IntelliPro VS. Doesn't really match up with the WhisperFlo. It matches up more with their Duraglass pumps or their Maxi Glass pumps. And then you have the IntelliPro 3 VSF, which is the it's the same as the Pentair IntelliFlo 3. So IntelliPro, IntelliFlo, and then you have the IntelliPro XF, and you have the IntelliPro VS. The pumps that have been discontinued by Pentair, if you want to write this down, is the IntelliFlo VS pump, the SuperFlo VS that I mentioned earlier, the IntelliFlo XF, that's been discontinued also. I don't think I've seen some of those before. Those are the pumps that have the large wet end, and you may have some of these on your route, the IntelliFlo XF. I didn't really like those. I liked the wet end, it was large, but for some reason I didn't really like these pumps, and Pentair discontinued them. And then you have the IntelliPro VS, which is the stay right version. And then you have the IntelliPro XF, which is the stay right version of the IntelliFlo. Now already you got a lot of these things floating in your head, and you're probably totally confused at this point. So I'm going to reset everything and just talk about 3 of their most popular pumps. And I'm going to talk about the Pentair models, which I think are more popular than the stay right models. The only reason you would see a stay right model is if the builder likes the System 3 filter, and then they have the heater that matches the Pentair heater. But normally you're going to see the tan colored VS pumps out there at your stops. And the main 3 you're going to see are the older IntelliFlos that have been discontinued. And you're going to see some newer IntelliFlo VS pumps probably. They still have the IntelliFlo 1 and 2 available. And the IntelliFlo 3, you're going to see these pop up. Then you're going to see a lot of SuperFlo VS, and then you might see some newer SuperFlo VST pumps, and then you're going to see some WhisperFlo VS or VST pumps. So those are the 3 that I'm going to focus here on this podcast. You get an idea of which of these 3 should you purchase for your pool if you're looking at the Pentair pumps. One thing I should also mention, and this happens sometimes, and I get calls from the guys in my group, the builder will put in a Pentair VS pump, and they'll put the SVRS version in. And this is a version that should only be on commercial pools because this is an anti-entrapment version of the pump. Technically, a commercial pool should never shut off, so you're running that pump 24/7. So this is why they have the SVRS system in there, because if a child were to maybe dive down to the main drain and sit on top of it, or if they were to stick their hand or arm into the skimmer, this pump will actually turn itself off because that's a safety mechanism to prevent anti-entrapment. You really wouldn't want a kid to be stuck to the main drain and drown, nor would you want to have them with their arm stuck in the skimmer until the fire department gets there. So these automatically shut off whenever there's an entrapment. The problem is if you install one of these on a residential pool's an SVRS system, and you go to even prime the pump, the alarm will probably go off saying that there's entrapment. And also, if you have a spa attached to your pool and you're going from pool mode to spa mode, it's going to think that as the valves are turning, it's going to think there's an entrapment going on and shut off. And so what happens is that if you have one of these SVRS pumps at a residential pool, you'll have to have the builder come out there and switch it out with a normal Pentair VS pump. Otherwise, you're going to be dealing with problems priming, problems going from spa to pool mode. So these are not designed for residential installations. The SVRS is for a commercial pool where that pump is running 24/7, and the only time it's going to shut off is if there's an entrapment issue or an entrapment of a child or an adult in the system. Of course, other things can cause this to shut off if maybe something gets stuck into the skimmer or something happens in that regard, it'll shut itself off. But these are not residential models. So I wanted to get that out of the way because this is an issue sometimes you'll run into. And if you're buying a pump, you'll see this and you'll be like, oh, I like to get the anti-entrapment from my house. You don't want to do that for that reason. It's going to cause you a lot of problems. So let me back up and talk about the SuperFlo VS. And it was one of the pumps that I really liked out there. I would install these at a lot of stops without automation. It was a really good pump, simple, affordable. It's a direct replacement for the Pentair SuperFlo pump. These were really popular maybe in the late 2010s or so, where you were looking for a good deal on a pump, so you would get a SuperFlo pump. They were like dirt cheap. You could put them everywhere. They were okay. They didn't have a lot of pull to them, but they were still decent, and you could put them on water features and small pools. And so these were really popular in California. A lot of builders put them in everywhere, and they were good. They're pretty reliable. They don't have a really large pump wet end area, but I didn't really have a problem with the SuperFlo pump. They were actually initially designed for pools that had copper plumbing and brass pumps. And so they were like a replacement for a pump that didn't need a lot of head or pull. And because, if you went from, 1.5-inch copper pipes to a 3 horsepower VS pump, you'd probably break something somewhere, and you would have maybe a lot of back pressure in the system because the water couldn't evacuate the system as fast as it was being pulled in. So the SuperFlo pump was designed as a direct replacement for the old brass pumps with copper plumbing. Some of you may still have some of these old brass pumps on your route. Most of mine are gone. I think the last one I had was like in 2019 or 2018. But that's why the SuperFlo was kind of created. Since it was so popular, Pentair made the SuperFlo VS so that you can have a direct replacement of these pumps. And it is something interesting with the SuperFlo VS. They made it a dual voltage pump that automatically switches the voltage. And when I called Pentair tech support on this many years ago, the guy was like, I don't know how it does it just does it. And so that was one of the first pumps that had that dual voltage ability. And so they dominated the market because a lot of people had panels that only had their pool on 115 volts. That's a single breaker. A lot of these older pools had a 1 horsepower single speed pump or a 1 horsepower or 3/4 horsepower brass pump. And this based a brass pump and with a regular motor on the back. The back of the motor wasn't brass, but the pump was. And so a lot of older homes have their equipment on 115 volts and not 230 volts like the newer pads. So Pentair decided to make this pump so that you can use it on a 230 volt or 115 volt application. So if someone had a 1.5 horsepower pump, they can easily put in the SuperFlo VS. And the only drawback was it didn't have communication capacity with automated systems. But it was affordable, and it still is affordable, by the way. It's still one of the lowest priced VS pumps in their lineup. And it was reliable. It has an easy control panel on the back. They just have that same panel also for the Pentair SuperFlo VST. And I like this pump. It was easy to install. The drawback with this pump, if it is a drawback for you, is that it has 1.5-inch discharge and intakes, or discharge and intake, only one on each pump. And it has the unions for it also, so you can easily install it. The outside portion of the 1.5-inch unions will fit 2-inch plumbing, and if you can directly plumb 1.5-inch directly into the inlet and outlet. So if you need more flow, it does affect the pool somewhat, going from 1.5-inch plumbing to 2-inch plumbing on the outside. So it's not going to be something that you would want to put on a 25,000 gallon pool. You would put this on an older pool that doesn't need a lot of pull, or a smaller pool. And so that's the one drawback with the SuperFlo VS. It has 1.5-inch intake and discharge, so it limits the flow slightly. And so for a bigger pool, I don't think it would be something you would want to install. And in all honesty, most pools, older pools, smaller pools, can get away with the SuperFlo VST now. It has a total horsepower of 1.5, so it has quite a lot of power. And by the way, the older SuperFlo VS was also 1.5 total horsepower. When I say total horsepower, that's the fact that you can actually run this thing at 1.5 horsepower if you wanted to use the full capacity of this pump. That would be 3450 RPMs on a single speed pump and the same 3450 RPMs on the VS pump. And that means that if you have it at full 100% power or at the full RPMs, you're pulling 1.5 total. You have 1.5 horsepower at your disposal. When it's running at lower speeds, it's going to pull maybe at 1 horsepower on a lower speed if you wanted to kind of correlate that. So for an older pool that had copper plumbing, having one of these installed, running it at maybe 2800 RPMs maximum, having it prime up at 2600 RPMs was a great way to save energy and to protect the pool from being damaged by the higher rated total horsepower VS pumps. If you have a pool that's larger, and if you have a pool that has a WhisperFlo pump on there, and WhisperFlo pumps were really popular here in California, they probably dominate most of my area. We had a really good Pentair rep here that retired, I guess, 20 plus years ago, and he dominated Southern California. And we have tan everywhere. 90% of the pools that I service have tan equipment, and everyone services about the same here in California. So the WhisperFlo is extremely popular in the West Coast. It's a good pump. It's really something that you can't find a lot of fault with. I think the biggest drawback with the WhisperFlo is that the seal plate, if it gets a little bit of water on there, will warp a little bit. I think Pentair fixed that, or they have a more durable seal plate. And the pump basket sometimes would tear if you had a lot of debris in the pool. If we had a Santa Ana wind event, the pump basket would tear itself and everything would get sucked into the impeller. So that would be my only drawback with the WhisperFlo. And sometimes the lid would be hard to get off because it would just get locked on there. So you'd have to use a rubber mallet to kind of tap the lid off. Besides that, the pump itself is extremely reliable. So why not make a direct VS replacement for the WhisperFlo? It took Pentair a while to get on board with this, mainly because I think the IntelliPro original version, or IntelliFlo, I should say, the original version. See, I'm already getting confused here. The IntelliFlo was a direct replacement for a WhisperFlo. So Pentair thought, there's no need to make a WhisperFlo VS or VST because we have the IntelliFlo. Now, the IntelliFlo started out with lower horsepower than it is now. Right now it's at 3 total horsepower. So it was technically a direct replacement for a WhisperFlo pump. You had a 1.5 or 2 horsepower or 1 horsepower. You can easily put in an IntelliFlo VS pump. So since they went to a 3 total horsepower with the IntelliFlo, with their IntelliFlo 3, they decided, I think, to make the WhisperFlo VST. This has the same exact controller on the back as a SuperFlo VST. I like this controller. I think it's easy to program. It's one of those things where you kind of have to get used to it, but they're pretty bulletproof. There's not a lot of errors or problems with that controller. And the controller basically is the drive on back of the pump, and this is the variable speed aspect of the pump. So you want to have a good drive on the back. You don't want to have one that's failing after 3 years. And I would say with the SuperFlo VS history behind it, it's been on the market for several years now, maybe over 10, or probably more than 10. It's got a good history behind it. And so they're using the same drive on the WhisperFlo VST pump or VS pump. And so you're buying a reliable pump because it has a 10-year track record already on the SuperFlo VS. So what would be some of the applications for the WhisperFlo VS? Of course, a direct replacement for WhisperFlo would be number 1. You'll have very minimal replumbing. You just take out the discharge and intake, maybe cut the pipe in front on top, put a coupler on, and you're all set to go. Or put a union on and you're all set to go. And basically you just drop it in there. It's going to be the same footprint with a little bit more on the back because of the drive and controller, but it's going to be a very similar footprint as a regular WhisperFlo pump. And it's going to be something that you can just drop in and install, and it does communicate with your automated system if you needed to connect it there. I really like this aspect because then you're paying a lot less for this pump than you would be paying for an IntelliFlo 3 or for an IntelliFlo 1 and 2. And I think it's something that a lot of people are looking for, a direct replacement without a lot of the features of the IntelliFlo 3. I mean, if you need the app control, that's perfectly fine. Then you would probably want to go with the IntelliFlo 3. But if you have a pool that has a 1 horsepower, 1.5 horsepower, or 2 horsepower WhisperFlo, I would say just go with the WhisperFlo VST because it has a total horsepower of 2.6. This also has dual voltage. Now, I probably would recommend the SuperFlo VST if you have a 1 horsepower on 115 volts, because what's going to happen is that total horsepower of 2.6 is not accessible at 1.5, at the 115 volts. It's only accessible at 230 volts. So what's going to happen is that 2.6 total horsepower is going to be modulated down to maybe 1.5 or 1.6, something like that. So you're kind of wasting money by buying this for a pool that has a 1 horsepower pump because you don't really need it, and it's going to modulate it down anyway to 1.5, which is the same as the SuperFlo VST. So go with that. If you have a 1.5 horsepower or 2 horsepower WhisperFlo, this would be the perfect pump because it has a total horsepower of 2.6, which is plenty of horsepower. You're going from a 1.5, you got plenty of horsepower for a solar array on your roof or for a spa that's far away, water features. This will have no problem taking the place of your 1.5 horsepower WhisperFlo or 2 horsepower WhisperFlo. It has the 2-inch plumbing just like the WhisperFlo, so it's really easy to drop right in there. And this is for most people with a WhisperFlo pump that has at 1.5 or 2 horsepower. I would say 90% of you should be going with the WhisperFlo VST over the IntelliFlo 3 unless you wanted to have that really nice app control. And I'll touch on the IntelliFlo 3 a little bit here. So you get an idea if you want the Acura of pool pumps, the IntelliFlo 3 is that pump for you. Now when it first came out, there was no control panel on the back. It was just kind of like the Jandy E pumps. And by the way, I hate those pumps when there's no controller. I had many pools that the builder would put in the Jandy E pump and basically is connected to the Aqualink, but those are inside someone's house, and so there's no way to know what's going on with that pump because there was no controller on the back, so it was extremely frustrating to do these stops without any kind of way to access the pump. And Pentair, when they first came out with this, didn't have a controller on the back, which is app control only. So then they kind of, heard from, I guess, everyone that's like, hey man, we need a controller, we want a controller on the back. So they do have versions of this with the controller on the back. The IntelliFlo 3 VSF is their Ferrari of pool pumps. I'm not going to go into too much detail. It has a total horsepower of 3, and they have different versions available. So if you look at the SKU numbers here, you have just the standard version, which is 01, I guess that's the model number, 011075. Then if you go down a little further, you can order the 011077, which has the touchscreen on board. And then you can also order the touchscreen separately. So if you wanted to order the screen, if you have one of these already, you can order the touchscreen, which is 356159Z, and that'll give you the screen for that. It's a nice color touchscreen for the back of the pump. And so now you can get the IntelliFlo 3 VSF with the touchscreen if you want that. Now, one of the problems with the older IntelliFlo pumps was the seal on the screen. So sometimes if you were cleaning a filter, and so a lot of times the top of that was broken off. It was kind of flimsy. And if you had that exposed and you were cleaning your filter and you took the lid off and a bunch of water got on there, if you had a big rainstorm, the seal would fail on that and that would be a problem. So the Pentair IntelliFlo 3, I think one of the reasons why they didn't put a screen on there, they wanted to remove a fail point on that pump. Now there's a screen on back, and it's a touchscreen LED screen. So I don't know. I mean, it's probably going to be really waterproof and it's going to probably last a long time. It looks a lot better and a lot of higher quality than the older screen. So definitely, I think if you want the pump with the screen, you probably can get this with the screen on back. It's app controlled, so the screen may not be necessary. I mean, you can control this thing to their app, and you may not need the screen. But a lot of people like the screen. I like pools with pumps with screens on them. And, when I get to a pool, I'd like to be able to see what's going on without having to pull my phone out and access an app. Plus, the customer has to allow access there. So there are those extra bells and whistles. Now, who would want an IntelliFlo 3 VSF? New pool builds, of course, would want this. You would want to put these on new pools that are being built. It's the top of the line pump. Why not install these at the new builds? If you have a customer with a 1.5 or 2 horsepower WhisperFlo or an older IntelliFlo VS pump, this would be great to put on there too because you have the 3 total horsepower. Do you need 3 total horsepower? More than likely not in most pool situations. I think probably 90% of them don't need 3 horsepower. There's a few that maybe have big solar arrays and they have a lot of water features. Maybe the pump's 50 yards away from the pool. Something like that would, of course, require 3 total horsepower. But for most applications, you wouldn't need that. And by the way, they do make a 1.5 horsepower version of the IntelliFlo 3. So if you have maybe a small swim pool or a smaller pool, or a pool doesn't really need that power, but you want to have all the bells and whistles of the IntelliFlo 3 VSF, you can get a 1.5 horsepower version and put that on your pool. I think they're promoting the 3 horsepower version primarily, but they do have the 1.5 horsepower version available, and that's the 011067 with a touchscreen and 011066 without it. So they have that option available. Bottom line, the IntelliFlo 3 VSF is the top of the line pump for Pentair. It's a direct replacement for their IntelliFlo VS pump. And I think if you're in the market for the best pump or the pump with the most bells and whistles, I would go with that pump. And again, all these are directly correlated to their Stay Right pumps. Instead of the IntelliFlo 3, it's the IntelliPro 3. If you go to Pentair's website and go to the pumps, go to products, they'll have the whole list of all the pumps available. And a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is shown there. And by the way, the IntelliFlo 3 comes with 3-inch plumbing, so that if you have larger PVC going into the pump, you're going to get more flow. The WhisperFlo again has 2-inch plumbing, and the SuperFlo VST, the WhisperFlo VS has 2-inch plumbing, and the SuperFlo VST has 1.5-inch plumbing. Those may be factors, so of course all these are factors, but that's kind of a brief run through of the 3 main Pentair pumps: the SuperFlo VST, the WhisperFlo VST, and the IntelliFlo 3 VSF. If you're looking for other podcasts I recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on the podcast icon. That'll take you to a drop-down menu of other podcasts I recorded. And if you're looking into the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.